Erased from history by the horrors of genocide, the Assyrian people's story is one of courage, survival, and suffering, yet it remains largely forgotten. Let's change that. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we dive into one of the most tragic and overlooked events of World War I, the Assyrian Genocide. Despite the immense suffering endured by the Assyrian people, this dark chapter remains largely forgotten. Let's uncover their story together. The Assyrian Genocide, one of the most horrific and tragic chapters of World War I, has largely faded from the collective memory of the world. While genocides such as the Holocaust and the Armenian Genocide are better known, the Assyrian Genocide remains largely overlooked despite its devastating scale. The genocide was part of a coordinated campaign by the Ottoman Empire during the war to eliminate non-Turkish, non-Muslim populations and reshape the demographic landscape of what is now modern-day Turkey. As we reflect on this atrocity, it is crucial to remember the resilience and endurance of the Assyrian people, whose history and culture have been shaped by centuries of persecution. The Assyrian people have ancient roots in the Middle East, with a heritage that traces back to the Assyrian Empire, one of the oldest civilizations in history. At its height, the Assyrian Empire controlled much of Mesopotamia, but even after its fall, the Assyrians continued to live as a distinct ethnic group. They maintained their cultural and religious traditions for thousands of years. A key aspect of Assyrian identity is their language, Neo-aramaic, a direct descendant of ancient Aramaic, the language spoken by Jesus Christ and his disciples. This linguistic link is a symbol of the Assyrians' enduring presence in the region despite centuries of hardship. Religiously, Assyrians are primarily Christian, divided into several denominations, such as the Assyrian Church of the East, the Syrian Orthodox Church, and the Chaldean Catholic Church. This Christian identity further distinguished them from the predominantly Muslim Ottoman Empire and would, tragically, become a significant factor in their persecution. Unlike the Armenians, who had a more centralized political presence within the empire, the Assyrians were dispersed across modern-day Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. This fragmentation left them vulnerable to the genocidal policies of the Ottoman government, which would target them alongside the Armenians and Greeks during World War I. Even before the genocide of World War I, the Assyrians had suffered violence and oppression under various regimes, including the Ottomans. During the reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid II in the late 19th century, a series of massacres known as the Hamidian Massacres targeted Christian minorities, including Assyrians. Tens of thousands of Armenians, Assyrians, and other Christians were killed in these attacks, and Assyrian communities, particularly in regions like Hakkari and Urmia, were subjected to violence, land seizures, and forced conversions to Islam. These early waves of persecution foreshadowed the more systematic violence that would follow. By the early 20th century, tensions within the Ottoman Empire were escalating. The empire, which had once been vast and multi-ethnic, was now in rapid decline. Amidst this decline, the leadership of the Ottoman Empire, particularly those in the Committee of Union and Progress, CUP, embraced a radical ideology of Turkish ethno-nationalism. In an effort to save what remained of the empire, they sought to transform it into a homogeneous Turkish-Muslim state, purging ethnic and religious minorities including the Assyrians. This vision of a pure state would require the removal or extermination of the empire's non-Turkish populations. The Assyrians, already weakened by decades of oppression, became targets in this radical attempt to reshape the empire. The Ottoman leadership feared that Christian minorities, particularly the Assyrians, could be influenced by foreign powers like Russia, which had a history of supporting Christian groups in the region. The Assyrians, concentrated in areas near the Russian and Iranian borders, were seen as especially vulnerable to Russian influence. This paranoia fueled the genocidal campaign, as the Ottoman government sought to eliminate what it perceived as a potential threat to its control. In October 1914, Talaat Pasha, one of the key figures in the cup, issued a decree calling for the deportation and expulsion of Assyrians from strategic areas near the empire's borders. The government framed this as a security concern, but it was in fact part of a larger effort to dismantle Assyrian communities and destroy their culture, language, religion, and social fabric. This was not merely an act of displacement. It was a calculated effort to annihilate the Assyrian people. Following this order, Assyrians were subjected to brutal death marches through the deserts of present-day Turkey and Syria. These forced marches were not just displacements, but deliberate acts of extermination. Assyrians were forced to walk for miles in harsh conditions, with little food or water. Those who collapsed from exhaustion or fell behind were killed by Ottoman soldiers and their Kurdish collaborators. Thousands died along the way, and those who survived the marches were left to endure further violence and suffering. In addition to these forced marches, the Assyrian population faced constant attacks from Ottoman forces. The Ottomans sought to crush any resistance with overwhelming brutality. Some Assyrians, under the leadership of Mar Shimun, the spiritual and political leader of the Assyrians, organized resistance efforts. Mar Shimun negotiated alliances with the Russian forces, who were also fighting the Ottoman Empire in World War I, and Assyrian fighters joined Russian troops in defense of their homeland. Despite their bravery, the Assyrians were vastly outnumbered and poorly equipped, and the Ottomans retaliated with brutal reprisals. The Ottoman military, particularly under the command of Jeved Bey, leader of the Butcher Battalion, carried out massacres with chilling efficiency. Villages were destroyed, and civilians were killed in cold blood. Churches, which were central to Assyrian identity, were desecrated. The systematic destruction of Assyrian communities continued across various provinces, with Mehmed Reshid Bey, the governor of Diyarbakir, playing a central role in organizing the extermination of Assyrians and other Christian minorities in his region. Reshid Bey's orders were brutally efficient. Men were executed, and women and children were forced on death marches or subjected to sexual violence and forced conversions. Many women were sold into slavery. Despite these horrific atrocities, acts of courage and resistance emerged from within the Assyrian community. In areas like Tkhuma and Azak, Assyrian villagers mounted a fierce defense against the Ottoman forces. These regions, with their difficult terrain, provided some measure of protection, allowing Assyrians to hold out against the onslaught. Individuals also showed incredible bravery, risking their lives to save others. Accounts of parents shielding their children from bullets, of villagers hiding from Ottoman soldiers, and of people sacrificing themselves to protect others are part of the legacy of the Assyrian Genocide. Mar Shimun's leadership was instrumental in the survival of many Assyrians. Realizing that staying in their homeland would mean certain death, he led tens of thousands of Assyrians on a perilous journey to seek refuge in Russia. Though many died along the way, his efforts saved thousands. The survivors found temporary safety in Russian territory, but the cost of survival was immense. Alongside Mar Shimun, other Assyrians fought back with what little they had, resisting the Ottoman onslaught with extraordinary courage. However, despite their bravery, the genocide continued for years. In 1918, Mar Shimun was assassinated, which dealt a devastating blow to Assyrian unity and resistance. The killing of Mar Shimun marked the end of organized Assyrian resistance, leaving the community vulnerable to further attacks. By the time the genocide was over, between 250,000 and 300,000 Assyrians had been killed, nearly half of the pre-war population. The aftermath of the Assyrian Genocide was marked by a complete lack of justice. The Ottoman authorities who orchestrated the genocide were never held accountable. While some Ottoman officials were briefly tried after World War I, these trials were largely superficial, and many of those responsible for the genocide escaped justice. Talaat Pasha, one of the chief architects of the genocide, was assassinated in 1921 by an Armenian nationalist. But justice for the Assyrian genocide was never pursued. The survivors of the genocide were scattered across the world, creating a diaspora that remains significant today. The destruction of Assyrian communities and the loss of their ancestral lands led to the erosion of their culture, language, and traditions. Despite these challenges, the Assyrian diaspora has worked hard to preserve its cultural heritage. Efforts to maintain the Assyrian language, history, and identity continue, even as the Assyrian community faces ongoing persecution in places like Iraq and Syria. One of the most painful aspects of the Assyrian genocide is the ongoing denial of its existence. The Turkish government continues to deny the genocide, dismissing it as a baseless accusation. This denial compounds the suffering of the Assyrian people, whose ancestors' deaths have been erased from official historical narratives. While some countries, such as Armenia, France, Germany, and Sweden, have recognized the Assyrian genocide, international recognition remains limited. The continued denial of the genocide and the lack of accountability for its perpetrators contribute to ongoing instability and violence for Assyrians in the Middle East. The lessons of the Assyrian genocide remain relevant today, as we must strive to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated. Recognizing the genocide and holding the perpetrators accountable is essential to healing the wounds of the past and ensuring that the Assyrian people's story is remembered. In remembering the Assyrian genocide, we honor the resilience and courage of a people who refuse to be erased from history. The survival of the Assyrian community, despite centuries of persecution and violence, is a testament to the strength of their identity and culture. The Assyrian genocide must no longer be forgotten. Only by acknowledging the full scope of this tragedy can we begin to heal the wounds of the past and prevent history from repeating itself. Thank you for watching and remembering this important part of history. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that deserve to be heard.